When you balance your garden beds, your mass with the lawn or the gravel, your voice, please get this. Even if the garden beds themselves look messy, your eyes can find rest in the voids, that is the lawn or the pathways. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my garden. My name is Vanessa, and I turn our yard into our own little happy place at home. And I want to give you whatever tools I have to help you do the same. Today, we're going to talk about one of the biggest mistakes I think most new gardeners make while trying to build a cottage garden in their landscape. We all love a cottage garden. It's so easy, carefree, and beautiful. What's not to love? But for the first few years of maintaining my cottage garden that I started from scratch, I kept feeling like something was off. It just wasn't giving me the charm that I was after. I was good at getting things to grow. There were even lots of flowers in my yard. And while I enjoyed the yard because it was far better than the blank slate I had before, it was still far from the little English cottage garden of my dreams. What was the problem? What did the professional gardeners know that I didn't? It took me a while, but I did get to the bottom of it. I didn't go to design school. I learned everything that I know about both how to grow plants and how to design a garden, sort of like you are, in the school of hard knock learning and gardening. Every time I ran into a problem, I went digging for the answers. And so if, like me, you want to get your cottage garden design right, here is one thing to avoid, or how to fix it if it's already a part of your garden journey. To illustrate this mistake, let me tell you a story. A couple of years ago, my friend who likes more of a formal style of cottage garden messaged me because she went to visit a very impressive cottage garden with large plant collections. She said that she was impressed with the plant collection, but she felt like she was unable to relax in the garden because something about it felt off. And then she said something that's sort of stuck with me since. Her best guess for the reason she felt unable to relax in this garden was that the garden, though impressive, was too busy. Her eyes couldn't find rest. As someone who appreciates rest, as is evidenced by her love of a more formal garden, she could spot the problem right away. She mentioned it to me specifically because she wondered why she didn't feel the same way when she saw my cottage garden. What was different about my cottage garden that allowed her eyes to find rest? That's interesting, isn't it? She gave me the words that day, but the feeling was already familiar to me. I had felt the same restless feeling in my own garden some years prior, had been working hard at fixing it. Answering her question was the birthplace of this video, because I think that if new gardeners understood how important this was and how to fix it, then they'd be off to a much better start than I had. Here's what I told her. The solution for this comes down to how well one understands the principles of garden design, of course. Many of us know how to grow plants well, but not how to design a garden. These two are indeed two separate things. First, let's talk about how people even fall into this problem to begin with. Cottage gardens are indeed supposed to look informal, dense, and are supposed to support a large variety of plants. That's true. Also, in my mind, the most important defining characteristic of a cottage garden is the fact that the plants tend to grow into their neighbor. This is done by planting so that the plants, once they've reached maturity, have no space between them. Unlike a formal garden that usually has like large groups of boxwood hedges, lots of symmetry, and often like the calmness of one color palette, the cottage garden is meant to elicit a sense of freedom and convey a sense of carelessness. If done well, it should look as if no effort was put into the planting of this, as if the plants just magically sprung together in this one piece of land. These are indeed the hallmarks of the cottage garden, and when done well, it's pure cottage garden magic. But the trick is that it has to be done well. And well in this case means forethought. It's not simply as easy as gathering some plants and planting them however one feels. There has to be a method to avoid the madness. While the cottage garden is meant to be carefree and informal, it's not meant to elicit madness, which is why the principles of balance must reign supreme even in the backbone of the cottage garden. We don't want super formal, but we don't want unstructured, overcrowded, jungly either. We want balance. Mass and void are the two most important things we are balancing in the cottage garden. Mass is made up of things that tend to sit tall, like the plants themselves or fountains or structures, while void refers to things like the lawn or the gravel paving, all of which are flat or low. In other words, you're balancing things that take up space and things that seem not to. So work on bettering your grass, especially if it has dead patches. Keep it looking consistently green. If you can't maintain your grass in spots because of your conditions, consider doing something else that will provide consistency to the eyes. And so perhaps adding a pathway or grass would be a better alternative. But most importantly, do not prioritize the size of your lawn over the size of your actual planting space. The tendency here is to feel like you need to have small garden beds or flower beds and large chunks of lawn. That's not what we want. We want balance. Do not let your voids be an afterthought. They are just as much a crucial part of your garden as the plants are. Balance it out. A good rule of thumb is just go 50-50. 50% mass, 50% void. When you balance your garden beds, your mass with the lawn or the gravel, your voids, please get this. Even if the garden beds themselves look messy, your eyes can find rest in the voids, that is the lawn or the pathways. But of course, we don't want to stop at striking the balance just between the mass and the void. Another place to strike balance is in how you plant the very plants in the garden beds themselves. While cottage gardens are indeed not formal gardens, as we've established, and formal gardens are defined by structure in the very plantings, the cottage garden shouldn't be devoid of all structure either. Growing a bunch of plants with different leaf structures, colors, and shapes and that has different bloom structures, colors, and shapes together in one place without much forethought is just bound, most of the time, to create something that looks chaotic. The question we have to ask ourselves is whether there's a way to manufacture rest for the eyes by arranging the plants in such a way to create more order. The answer is yes, of course. There are many ways you can do this, but here are two. 1. Prioritize creating distinction between leaf sizes, shapes, and colors from its neighboring plants. This automatically creates order, which is what we want. So you might plant something with large leaves next to something with finer leaves, next to something with tall leaves. For example, peony leaves, which are medium size, can go next to catmint leaves, which are small, which can go next to iris leaves, which are long and tall, which can go next to hydrangea leaves, which tend to be the largest of these four. What you would not want to do is plant something like catmint leaves next to lavender leaves, next to gaura leaves. These plants all have fine wispy-like leaves. It's not that you could never do this, but if you were to do that, you'd have to distinguish them by some other means, maybe by the size of the flowers. Maybe make sure the leaves are different colors, or perhaps even the blooms are entirely different shapes. The other way to create distinction in the very planting of the flower bed and thereby create even better balance is to bulk up the number of small perennials before adding them to the garden. Early on in my garden journey, I'd found that while I had multiple plants of the same variety dotted throughout the garden, it would have been best to have grouped them together first and then dot the groups throughout the garden. Seeing a little bit of each plant was not nearly as impactful as seeing groups of each plant repeated multiple times throughout the garden. A good rule of thumb to help you sort this out is to plant small perennials in groups of 3 to 7, depending on your garden plot. Then repeat those groups strategically throughout the garden. These are things like, black-eyed Susans, echinacea, daisies, etc. What this does is it brings the small scale of the perennials up to allow them to be seen more like low-growing bushes. This is how you manufacture garden charm while you still create distinction. The principles of balance are true in most areas of life, but especially when it comes to beautiful things. A well-structured cottage garden, while potentially an oxymoron to some, is, in my opinion, the perfect balance and most pleasing to the eyes. Hi, do you know that this is not even the easiest mistake I believe new gardeners make in the beginning? By far the easiest mistake is to plant a garden that is in full color in summer, but is absent of blooms the rest of the year. That's boring. Check out this next video where I give you helpful tips for how to avoid this very mistake.